Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of Tintswalo's Perspective. This is where we have discussions with young people about a variety of issues, just to hear their perspectives on matters of national concern, and also get to know some of the work that they are engaged in as part of transforming the society for the better. This is our 10th episode. We have reached the 10th episode milestone largely because of your continued support of this platform. We really appreciate the level of support that you've been showing us in being part of these conversations, in sharing the posters about the dialogues we've been having, but also the guests as well. We don't take it lightly that people have to take out time out of their busy schedules to be part of this. So we are pretty excited. We had hoped that we'd have a recorded session, a live recorded session, meaning physically recorded session, but unfortunately, that could not happen as a result of a number of issues. But yeah, we are here, and today we are having a very exciting conversation around the national dialogue. You would know that for the past 3 weeks, we've been reflecting on the outcomes of the elections and some of the things that have been happening. We spoke about, the outcome themselves and what do they mean. We reflected on the voting day and some of the challenges and how those challenges can be avoided. We spoke about youth participation, voter participation. We spoke about the GNU and reacted to it and what does it mean. And last week we spoke about the importance of young people being represented and participating in decision making. And we have seen out of the cabinet that was announced that there were fairly young people that were included, and today we'll be discussing the national dialogue under the topic, the youth's perspective of the Looming South African National Dialogue. You would know that part of the agreement of the national dialogue, of the government of national unity is a commitment to have a national dialogue to reflect on the current challenges that are facing South Africa, but also to forge a social compact in order to resolve those challenges. And this national dialogue must be inclusive of all key stakeholders in society. So today, to help us discuss all things national dialogue from a youth perspective, I'm joined by comrades Tshepo, Lethea, as well as Boitumelo Thage, who I'm just about to add on the screen right now. Lady and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the fact that you've taken time to be with us to discuss this question of the national dialogue and give a youth perspective. And I think it's timely because this question of the national dialogue has just been endorsed by a number of civil society organizations that include the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, the Robert Mangaliso Sibuka Foundation, the Steve Biko Foundation, the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation, and other foundations. And I think even some political parties, assumingly all the parties that signed the statement of intent of the GNU, the 11 political parties, which we hear now have actually increased to 80, are also endorsing that particular call for a national dialogue. So that's what we'll be talking about. And thank you so much for joining me. So I'll kindly ask you to introduce yourselves, and in your introduction, tell us a bit more about your activism journey and what you're currently engaged in, because part of what we do here is to profile young people in order to communicate the message that Tintswalo is not just the recipient of, the democratic dividend, but Tintswalo is also actively engaged in deepening democracy and transforming society for the better. So I'll start with Comrade Boitumelo Thage. Kindly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you're engaged in.
Thank you very much for the platform. My name is Boitumelo Thage, as introduced by the host. I'm a social justice and anti-GBV activist, and I strongly believe in young people being involved in politics and in political spaces, not only, of course, for being part of political parties, but also for, more importantly, defending the gains of democracy. I'm also a published author of 2 children's books that speak to social issues and societal problems that we're faced with the hope or aim of encouraging children, more importantly, to know what is happening in our country, know what is happening in our society, and to understand their role in all of the social ills that we're faced with and what they can do to stand up for what is right. Thank you.
Thank you, Boitumelo. Comrade Tshepo, please introduce yourself. Oh, sorry, let me unmute you, Tshepo. Sorry, I didn't unmute you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My name is Tshepo Lethea. I'm an engineer by qualification, and I think I'm a social activist of some sort. I don't think I fall under some strict category, but look, I try in my own spare time to raise problematic views on social media, but I'm quite active in the engineering space. I think recently I've been asked to be the SAIC FLP Western Cape rep, which is quite a big thing in our space. And essentially what we do, we ask people in the profession to do more than just design and draw things. Because if you're an engineer, if you don't understand the society in which you're designing or making things for, you might actually do things that don't actually help anybody. So I do have a history, SRC stuff, protest now and then, but yeah, and I think I'm actually quite active in the engineering space, and I talk too much on social media. That's what I do.
Thank you very much. I'm joined by the coolest of comrades. One is the youngest chancellor of the ANC, the other is the coolest comrade in the ANC. So yeah, I'm hoping we're going to have a very chilled but yet meaningful conversation. So as I said in my intro, there has been this pronounced call for a national dialogue, right? As a starting point, do we feel that call is timely? Do we feel that it's relevant and that national dialogue it's necessary? Because I think it's very important for us to establish that first, whether that call in itself it's necessary. And maybe I'll start with you, Tshepo, then I'll go to Boitumelo.
Yeah, look, I did think about it a lot, né? And I also looked at other national dialogues, right? So I think Yemen had one. I think Congo is trying to have one. The DRC is trying to have one. I think the most recent successful one was Tunisia. And I did ask ChatGPT, and I think one of the first ones was asked in South Africa in 1991 till 1993, right? That fit the definition of national dialogue. And most of them have always been after a traumatic thing. So whether it's revolutions, whether it's apartheid. So this one is quite unique. It looks like a preemptive one, essentially. It looks like we're having a national dialogue to prevent something drastic from happening instead of healing ourselves after trauma. So it's quite unique in that sense, right? And I think from lessons learned from all the other ones, I think it might actually be very timely because you don't want to go to therapy. For me, national dialogues, I found a way to make it make sense to me. It's like group therapy, right? Do you want to go to therapy now as a family, or do you want to have the trauma then go to therapy, right? So I think this one, in my understanding, we're trying to prevent a situation that needs us to heal from a trauma. And I think Palili Hoot and them gave us scenarios back then of Kwara. And we were actually in Kwara, ne? And we're trying to say, guys, what's going to happen now is a mess. Can we just put our heads together now before we get into the next mess that we're going to get into? So I think it's timely, but I think it's quite smart that we're doing it now. Yeah. So to answer the time,
thanks.
I think it's quite smart.
No, thanks. But Boitumelo, what's your view? Do you think this is timely?
I don't want to say I would say it's timely, but with the research that I did after our phone call yesterday, I think it's something that was inevitable from the beginning of the year when the election period started. One, because we all had to acknowledge that this would be the most important election year or period post 1994, because it's the 30-year mark of democracy and all of these things. But it's also the most, I think, highly engaged election year, in the sense that so many people have been engaging on what has happened pre, post, and during the election period that we just underwent. So I think in that sense, it has given the public space to engage more thoroughly. I don't think there's ever been an election period where it was this much, there was this much engagement. And I think towards this GNU discussion and all the provinces discussing their allocation of MECs and all of that, this has given, for me, the public has been given room in the discussion. I don't know if that makes sense, but in my opinion, yes, it wasn't necessarily something that we would have preempted, but it's something that I think was inevitable, to put it bluntly, I think. Thanks.
All right. So Boitumelo says it was inevitable. Tshepo says it's actually timely and quite smart that in that it is more preventative rather than reactive to a post-crisis situation. And I think I agree. And maybe now I would like to focus on the composition and the agenda of the national dialogue, to say who should actually form part of this national dialogue and what should be its agenda. So if we were to say these are the 5 strategic issues that we should focus on going into this national dialogue, and if this national dialogue is really inclusive, these are the key stakeholders that it must include, because oftentimes these dialogues or these conversations, they happen in an elitist manner where people tend to feel like they happen far from us. It's just a group of the elites and the powerful in society that are meeting to have a discussion about our lives and come and tell us what the output of their conversation is, and some of the things we may not necessarily agree with. So in terms of composition and agenda, what would you prescribe?
So maybe I'll jump in. I have a view. And people will say it's crazy, but there's no genuine national dialogue that can happen in South Africa without what I call key players. And by key players, I mean, if you don't have Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki in that dialogue, you are wasting time, right? If you don't have Helen Zille and Julius Malema, you are wasting time. If you don't have Rupert himself, he must not send in somebody. No. If you don't have the actual guys, it's just fun. We're doing some tick-box exercise. If you don't get the actual guys at the helm of power in South Africa, you actually need Rupert's voice. Do you like him? I don't like him. But you actually need his voice in the discussion, right? Because you can't say people must do things that when you leaders are not willing to do them. Thabo himself must have a discussion in public with Jacob Zuma and say, no, but brah, here's what I think. And Zuma must say it to his face that when I said you sold out by doing 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, without those guys, I don't know what we're doing. It loses the point, right? And someone was saying, yeah, but young people, I'll come to young people. But I'm saying the composition for me is a compulsory thing. Without Jacob Zuma, without Thabo Mbeki themselves, without Helen Zille, and they must not send people. I'm saying Julius must not send Floyd. I'm not undermining Floyd in any way, right? But I'm saying the amount of followership the amount of people who feel represented by Thabo Mbeki, who feel represented by Jacob Zuma, who feel represented by Helen Zille, who feel represented by Lekhanyanis himself, who feel represented by Mrs. Zulu. You can't have it with half leaders and half popular people and technocrats. You actually have to have those guys, right? Because without them, no one will even remember it. I'll make an example. We did have a national dialogue on coalitions just August last year. No one even remembers it. No one remembers it, right? Yes, it led to good results, and I think that's why we can have a functional government now. But it's pointless if you don't have those guys. We're wasting time. We're really wasting time. And their inability to find each other is part of the reasons why we're here, politically, that is. If you think Helen Zilla's wrong, as Jacob, you must say it to her face and allow her to respond and say, no, but we know you're wrong by doing 1, 2, 3, 4. For me, the composition is that you must actually get the real power players, the real guys, not their representatives, not their fans, not their friends, not their side chick, no, themselves. They themselves must be in the table discussing those things. And I really think, I hope that young people from the EFF are going to speak to Julia. Because it's very easy for him to avoid discussion and say, I don't want to talk to racists. It's very easy for Jacob Zuma to say, I don't want to speak to Spanbar. It's very easy. But if you don't hold those leaders accountable, now that they're still alive, we are going to inherit the problems that they've given us because they have polarized society in a bit, right? So I think I must force Cyril and say, hey, brah, please, whether you like whoever, I don't care. Because otherwise, I don't know what we're doing, right? And it's a fact. I think that's how power works, and that's where power is. Yeah, young people are great. I'm saying viva young people. I don't mind. But who do we know who's a young prominent person in the DA? Who do we know who's a young prominent young person who commands industry? Who do we know who's a young prominent young person who can make workers not to work? We don't have that. It's a sad reality, but we don't actually have prominent young people who can cause this country to stop tomorrow. Do we have old people who can do it? Yes, and they've done it before. We've seen them, right? So we as the young people now, we can use our proxy and say, we are forcing you to come to the stage. From our own political parties, from our own business lives, from our own profession, we must say, yeah, you caused this mess. Zoralang, sit here and tell us the things that you tell us in corners, the things that you tell us in private about Sbanban did what. Yeah, come say it to the nation. Because I think without doing that, we'll even forget this national debt. It won't make sense. It won't make sense at all. So in terms of composition, I think the big guys, whether we like it or not, Rupert is a big guy. Helen Zille is a big guy, right? Those big guys must be at the table. And obviously,
Let me stop you there, Tshepo. Boitumelo, do you agree with Tshepo's perspective of having a national confessions and confrontation by the big players? What is your view in terms of the composition before we get to the content of the national dialogue?
Look, I do, and I want to maybe point reference to history, right? I think what Tshepo is referring to happened in 1990 something, in 90s towards the 1994 elections. That's why even when we started, I said this is like 30 years of democracy, and it's that 30-year mark. The CODESA was part of what you describe or define as the national dialogue that took place in the 90s. And I think that's where this happened. But now we need it to happen on a larger scale, and we need to happen with the current / former leaders. And in the leaders that he has mentioned, I'd add Kgalema Motlanthe, all those former presidents and former deputy presidents that were part of the past 6 years or 6 administrations, so that we know where they want to take our country. And then when we take over as young people, as he said, we know that we would have forced these people to have this dialogue.
and maybe
No, thank you. I hear where you're coming from, Tshepo, supported by Boitumelo, because oftentimes, these guys have become points of polarization, because all of them are speaking in silos, right? And maybe that's why we have really struggled in terms of forging a social compact, a real social compact, right? I mean, this was problematized since COVID, where on the one side you had business coming up with a economic recovery strategy of their own, and government coming up with their own, and where all of us were looking at them to engage, to consolidate. It seemed that that consolidation was not happening, and that issue is still a bone of contention between government and private sector to this day. And one expected that that consolidation would be swift because you have NETLEC as a consolidation institution of these different views by the key stakeholders. So I think I fundamentally agree that to have those players, it's important. But I would also say that we should not, close doors for everyone else, right? Certainly because whatever that must come out of that, we must all rally behind it. Otherwise, we'll just become a nation of national dialogues. And the more and more you do something, the law of diminishing returns tells us that the utility that you derive at some point will diminish and it will become a useless exercise. So I certainly agree. So now let's speak to the content. If
Sure.
if there were 5 key issues you would want this national dialogue to focus on, what would be those?
I have two, not even five. I think I have two, right?
Sure.
And I just want to close up on terms of who. So I'm saying the big guys because they bring an audience. I promise you, if Julius is talking somewhere, he's coming with all his people. If Jacob Zuma is speaking somewhere, so you can't get overall participation in South Africa without bringing the big people who bring the guys to watch, right? So I'm not only bringing them for their sake, I'm bringing them so that they can bring everybody who follows them, right? Two, they must also have experts who can present the issues nicely and with facts, right? So, for example, we must ask the experts to prepare what is it that we're going to talk about thoroughly based on facts so that we can maybe narrow the conversation down. So, I think big guys, experts, then us. But in terms of what we're going to speak about, for me, there are two things. Now, there are two things. And those are the two things I think that are making people opt out of democracy, right? It's identity plus the economy. And identity, I mean national identity, right? So I think South Africa is tribes, man. The white tribe is in their corner. I think the elections have shown us that the white tribe does not want to move from its tribalistic ways in their corner. They vote for whoever looks like them, who speaks a certain way, who advocates for their interests, right? Yeah, we've seen many other things that we're learning from these elections. For example, the colored vote, we've seen there's a bit of movement. We've also seen that regional voting blocks, for example, MK with KZN, right? We've seen a trend. And if you don't do something about that trend, it's been a trend for some time, right? But you can't do something about that trend if you don't address the issue of the economy. You can't. I'm saying it also becomes very wishy-washy, right? We must have agreements about the economy and our targets and how everyone's going to play into it. That's why we need everybody. Those who don't have things, those who have a little, those who have a lot, must be part of this discussion. And you must decide, you must agree that, guys, it's untenable. It doesn't make sense. Where we are as a country now, it's a ticking time bomb. It really does not make sense. So for me, this idea of it's been an old idea of an economic CODESA, second phase of the third transition, economic freedom. It's not a new idea. But I think how we've not done it, I think the point of this, for me, the point of this national dialogue must be actually centered around the economy and second, the identity. But if we don't speak about the economy, all these other things, we must agree. And I saw a presentation about how different groups have grown or regressed in South Africa, right? And we must actually have the facts at the table and say, guys, look, here's the truth. Whether you like Thabo, whether you like Jacob Zuma, here's what actually happened in this period. Here's what actually happened in this period. Here's what actually happened in this period. And without all of us together, if we actually go down, there is no political party system. They won't have MPs when the country is fighting. The system that we have now is very fragile. So for me, I think the issue of the economy is central, but also identity in South Africa becomes a very key issue. But economy.
So Tshepo says national identity and the economy and the economy. What are your three issues, Boitumelo?
I think she's on mute. I can't hear her.
Sorry, you're muted. Please unmute.
I'm so sorry about that. My three issues, one would be both higher and basic education. And those are two sectors that are very important to me. And I believe that these are the two sectors that prepare the next generation of leaders. I mean, all three of us here went through basic and higher education. And that's actually where this topic, this is where we got to arrive to this topic. The second one would obviously be, I think, the international aspects of things, and in embracing the new minister of DIRCO and the two deputy ministers have just been appointed. I would want the national dialogue to speak to addressing international issues, supporting Palestine, protecting and fighting with and standing with Palestine, and all the Kenya, the recent protests that have broken out in Kenya. Where does the national dialogue stand in all of this? Does it stand with them, or all of these things? I would want us to address that on a larger scale. And then thirdly, I would also want us to speak to the poverty aspect of things. The national dialogue needs to move towards service delivery, particularly in township areas, addressing socioeconomic issues, gender-based violence, also bringing back education and ensuring that basic education, the schools have to be properly infrastructured and all of these things. So I'd want the national dialogue to be in line with what the ANC would have stood for in the past 30 years and continue from where we have gotten to so far.
So we have about five issues. Tshepo says national identity, economics. Boitumelo says foreign policy, as well as the issue of education and service delivery. I think if I were to add there, I would say you need to put the question of national security, as part of the key issues to be discussed. And when we speak about national security here, we're not just speaking about crime, but we're speaking about security in its full sense, right? I mean, what has been the impact of the influx of foreign nationals in our country, and have that discussion quite frankly and quite, factually and objectively, without, insinuations of xenophobic connotations, but really just discussing how has this affected our developmental trajectory. And I think that the other issue that becomes important for me is social cohesion in the real sense, and even how we politic, because currently you're sitting with so many political parties. Chances are going into the next elections, there'll still be more political parties. Can't we have a national agreement to say, in terms of political representation, in terms of parties that must contest elections, this is the limit, or this is the criteria of entry, and set that criteria of entry, at a level in which it's not easy for me and Tshepo to wake up one day because we're drunk and I just won the lottery jackpot and say, hey, Mchad, that's my game, but we really need to think hard about, can we really achieve, this criteria to actually form a political party. And I say this because I feel that that issue of political parties has a huge impact on social cohesion, right? How do you expect people to come together when they have so many options to choose from? And these options are divisive in themselves, are polarizing in themselves. So I think I would like to see that issue being being part of the discussion. But lastly, I think integrated development on a continental level, in the real sense, right? I mean, we talk about the free trade area protocol and all of that, but it seems like we're moving very slow, right? And I would like to see South Africa regain its acclaimed prominence in terms of the Pan-Africanist agenda. We were once revered for being the leaders in that space with the African Renaissance. How do we bring back that? To ensure that we can also be able to take that leadership role in terms of the development of the African continent collectively. So in agreeing with all of the issues you've raised, I think that's one of the issues I would add on the table, because the issue of the economy is encompassing, the issue of national identity is also encompassing. So I think we can get into specificities, but in terms of the broader umbrella bodies, those for me make sense. Now, the question becomes then, what becomes our role as young people going into this national dialogue, right? How do we actively organize ourselves in order to ensure that the agenda is in our interest? It advocates for things that we are concerned about. Those issues we spoke about actually find themselves on the agenda. I know Tshepo has already spoken about the issue of lobbying our proxies and the people that we follow to say, "Hey, we want you to be," But what more of an active role do we play ahead, within, and post this national dialogue? And then after this, I think I'll bring comments from people who are joining us through live streams. You can pose your questions so that we can pose them to our guests.
So can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
So if you say to any young person national dialogue, they're going to say to you, we're tired of more talking. Like, guys, young people are not even voting, they're not even participating, and you want them to do more talking. I promise you, I think as a country, we have talking fatigue. We have some level of democratic fatigue. Like we especially young people, right? We're like, you guys want to talk again? Really? Like, what has this talking done for us? I'm looking at my life. It's going to be very hard right now to actually convince. When you try to convince young people to vote, about it, right? If you look at the stats, if you look at young people have lost faith in the democratic project, and they've decided to opt out of it by not participating. Now, our role as, I think, those ones who actually understand the need is to actually remind one last time and say, my friends, look, I know you're tired. I know you are tired of this thing. You don't see any role for yourself. You don't see any outcome. I'm just begging you one last time. Just listen to this one, right? I think our role is to actually get them to. I promise you, I put the idea of national dialogue in a WhatsApp group. Yes, I got attacked. People were insulting me. People, my own friends were like, "Yes, Tshepo, are you mad?" People are tired. People are tired of talking. People are tired, right? Especially when I don't see one result. But two, we must also be honest. We're not young people in 1991. We're young people in 2024, where social media has made our concentration span so short. We're young people who are used to adverts, interruptions, and things like that. If things are not quick, jumpy, attractive, you lose them, right? You lose a lot of young people, but not that they're not interested. It's just that how we share the message is not cool, or is not attractive enough. And instead of making things attractive for them, we actually want to blame them for not being interested enough. No, you are failing to appeal to them, right? So I think my role is, that's why I came here, right? My role is, guys, let's try this thing out. Let's actually give it a listen. let's see if we can learn anything from this process for ourselves, right? So I'm going to beg people at work, guys, let's do it. I'm going to beg young civil engineers who think politics is something for stupid people who don't know what to do with that. I'm going to beg them and say, guys, just listen for an hour or for this day, right? And we must also communicate in a way that makes sense. And for me, I think the best example I've made, or I tried to make it easy for some people to understand, what is this national dialogue? National dialogue for me is like therapy, my brother. And if you go suggest therapy to somebody who does not have food, they are going to laugh at you. So you want me to go to therapy? Or if you go to people who are fighting and suggest therapy, they're going to laugh at you because they're not used to it, right? And the best person who convinced me about therapy was Tony Soprano, by the way. He's a mafia gangster lord, but it's a fictional character. And how they did it, they showed us that even the mafia don himself needs this thing of talking because we don't have any other productive mechanism to find each other. People have to find each other. And if you don't talk, we actually have to fight. There's no other way. If you don't talk, you must actually suggest another format of us fighting each other. And we don't want to fight like that. So it's either we're going to talk, we're going to fight, or we're going to resign. The option now people have chosen is to resign. Right? So we must actually make this talking thing very attractive and effective and impactful, and we must show them. So I think my role that I've taken upon myself now is to say, guys, look, let's try this talking thing. Let's try it. Let's try, even if you have family members, let's try the talking thing. Let's try it. Because I think it's effective. It works. It works. It actually works. But people don't see it because we're in a corner, right? But I'm saying my role is to say, guys, I don't want to fight now. I have 3 kids. I don't want them to be sending each other posters and pictures and say, shame, poor mama, lost a leg. Because it looks cool now when you show pictures of other kids internationally and show solidarity. I don't want people to find solidarity with my children. I don't want the situation where we're taking pictures, hoping that the UN supports, intervenes in a civil war of South Africa. I don't want us to get there. I have no interest in fighting people physical. I have no interest in fighting my fellow black brothers. I have no interest. But the only way to prevent it is to find some other mechanism. Voting was one. It's not working. People are opting out of it. So we must actually talk. I know it sounds ridiculous. You sound like a sellout. You sound insane when you say, guys, let's talk. But it has proven time and time again to be effective. So I think my role is to bring everyone to this talking thing.
Yeah, but Boitumelo, what's your view? What becomes our role as young people?
Yes, Tshepo speaks for so long now, and then my train of thought comes and goes back. I want to add to what he said because I'm in agreement fully. In that, well, there's a disagreement that I have that says that I think there's a generation of young people, maybe we'll call them Gen Z / Ma 2000, that I think are surprisingly heavily engaged in politics, not involved, but engaged. I've been scrolling on TikTok and I've been seeing the short clips of how they think GNU is going to look, where they do skits to say this is DA, this is PA, this is ANC. And I think that's part and parcel of those are the young people that we must bring into the conversation so that they continue to share those skits across the social media lines so that we can bring the broader society to understand what is happening. Because I think there's an understanding that the broader society has on GNU, and they've brought it upon themselves to understand how they think it looks. They've gone to understand how the ANC functions, how the DA functions in their minds, and they do skits about it. So I think maybe to add to what Tshepo says, let's use the power of social media to spread that word. So we use TikTok, we do short clips explaining what GNU is. We use TikTok dances. I mean, the Kamduze challenge, I think, greatly assisted us with election work. Not just to vote for the ANC, but for people to actually be engaged in the election process as a whole. So we use TikTok, we use dance challenges, we go on Instagram, we use such platforms as OR Tambo School of Leadership so that we grab a larger audience, but also bring people to understand what would happen if, one, we ignore GNU and where we currently are as a country, but secondly, if we just at home and do nothing about where we want our country in the next 5 years. So that's the social media aspect of it. And where I'd lost my train of thought was to say, we need to also go back to basics in terms of institutions of higher learning, where it's not about me going, studying psychology, graduating, doing my honors, my masters, and then going to work as a psychologist. And I don't care what happens on and off campus. I think we need to go back to rejuvenating institutions of higher learning to becoming hubs of what, if you'd call it, for lack of better word, political involvement. I think the EFF Students Command, the DASA, I think the PYA as a whole need now go back to how it was during the Fees Must Fall, during the Afrikaans Must Fall, the Reds Must Fall, and all of those movements that took place close to 10 years ago. And I'm saying this because institutions of higher learning created a huge interest for young people with regards to politics and political involvement. So we need to go back to doing that, getting to young people who are now in their early 20s, an entirely new generation of student leaders. They need to have an engagement on GNU. They need to understand what GNU is. They need to understand where they stand as student leaders and as students in the GNU process, so that when they complete their law degrees, become lawyers, they know what their role is in society, not just in the courtroom, but outside of the courtroom as well. And maybe push towards having the next generation understanding that you can be a teacher, but your role in society is so much more than that. So, and then lastly, the voter education aspect when it comes to young people, I think was very poor in the past 5 years and in the election period. So maybe we need to up that going into the next elections, having more inclusive voter educations, going into townships, going into rural areas, going into institutions of higher learning. I think Wits did have voter educations, and you could see with the TikToks and the Instagrams. So we need to have it across UCT, UNISA, TUT, all of these campuses, high schoolers. In the beginning of the year, we were visiting high schools trying to get matrix to vote. And you could see that as 18-year-olds, they didn't understand the importance of voting. They felt that it doesn't matter whether or not they vote. So we need to go into high schools, bring those 18-year-olds to understand that their vote literally matters. So we need to find ways of bringing everybody into the conversation, but also bringing everybody to understand what their role in the conversation is. Am I muted?
No,
Oh,
I hear you. I hear you, and I agree with a lot of things that you've said. But I think what makes people tired of talking, Tshepo, is the fact that they feel like they're not being heard. You know, it's one thing to talk, but if you feel like we're not being heard, you know, and this is partly part of the reason why people are even buying out of, you know, the electoral means of political participation, because they feel like, I mean, it seems like it doesn't matter how many times we vote, things don't change, you know, at a pace that is satisfying. So what is the point? I'm just going to go there and legitimize this system that is seemingly oppressive towards me, right? And I mean, we can have a debate whether or not, you know, the perceptions that things have not changed are real or they are sponsored, but it doesn't take away the fact that that is the perception. And people, you know, a number of young people I've had conversations with around this whole thing of, you know, a national dialogue. They say, okay, cool, but are we going to be heard, right? Are we going to be heard? Can go there. I mean, some people even tell you we go to conferences every year, you know, and we speak nice English there, we research, but seemingly those things don't produce a new way of doing things. They don't produce new results. And I mean, we all know what Einstein says about doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And hence I said, if this national dialogue becomes just another dialogue, even if you have all those big people in the room, but it doesn't produce anything different, chances are, you know, the utility that you will derive from dialoguing will be diminished even further. And in fact, it might lead us to where you don't want to go, Tshepo, because people may feel, you know what, maybe we must do something drastic in order for us to be heard. And in fact, on your point that people are buying out of, the electoral means of political participation, there's a study done by the Sciences Research Council on behalf of the IEC ahead of the elections, and it was indicating that young people are buying out of, voting, and that is actually a symptom of them buying out of electoral means of political participation. They prefer to engage in different means. The young people that you speak of, Boitumelo, that are on TikTok and have these views, they're on Twitter, they have these views. When it's protest, they are there. Chances are a huge chunk of them don't vote because they find it ineffective. But if you were to say, let's do something different that does not include voting, they will actually engage and they will be engaged. I mean, we can even do a study and say out of the fees must fall generation, in as much as it was a massive movement, how many of those young people are actually actively involved and actually go to the polls and vote? You might find that you'll be shocked by the results. But it may be easier to gather them into a protest because they are buying more into non-electoral means of political participation. And I think that's a conversation that we should have, even at the national dialogue. We must interpret that phenomenon to say, what does it mean? So that, as Tshepo says, we can come up with new mechanisms of, being able to consolidate people's voices, because right now, as we're sitting, Comrade Tshepo and Boitumelo, the number of people who voted is far less than those who did not vote.
Yes.
And those who did not vote can say, but this government, who does it represent? Because I mean, it was voted by a small fraction of the population. Fair argument. I mean, the university management used to use this against us in the SRC. Maralena, you were voted by 18% of the student populace. So you can't tell us anything. And I think that's a scary part. But let me bring in questions from people who are watching so that we can respond to some of them. I've been sharing some of the comments because we can't read all of them. I think the first one is from Moscow. It says, can white people or group be referred to as a tribe? I think it's your comment. Maybe you were referring to them as a tribe in colloquial terms, not, but you'll respond to that. And then there is Tony Payne who says, do we really need this national dialogue? How is it going to benefit South Africans, especially the workers? Maybe we need a statement of national dialogue intent first before we hold this dialogue. I guess he's saying we need a framework of the of the dialogue before we go there. And then trying to find another question. Okay, these are just okay. Here's another question from Mtobis, who says the problem with institutions of higher learning, there are VCs who hate politics in such a way that any gathering inside campus parameters is a threat. How can we deal with those tendencies? Yeah, those are the questions. And maybe to add mine there is to say, what kind of social compact would be satisfying from a youth perspective out of this national dialogue? Because part of what the statement of intent of the government of national unity says is that out of this national dialogue, there must be a new social compact. So, what would be an acceptable social compact for us out of this process?
Now, Boitumelo, will start this time so you can speak long.
Directed at Tshepo. So I'll go to the one by Jeffrey. Do we really need these national dialogues? I think we partially answered this one in the discussion, but it's important for us to rally not just young. I think to answer his question, it's important for us to rally not just young people around the national dialogue. but also to bring people to understand, which is what Tshepo said, even when he defined what it means to him, bringing people to understand what the national dialogue is and its importance going forward in the next 5 years, but also understanding what this national dialogue would mean in GNU and GPU and all of these things, to say that we are currently faced with a problem of having, for the first time, to deal with about more than one political party in the executive of the country. What does this mean for us? How are we going to experience the next 5 years? Will service delivery decrease or increase? Where do we stand in terms of accountability? So we need to bring people to understand what the GNU or the national dialogue, who is it going to account to, how is it going to account to the people, having people part of the conversation on a larger scale so that we're able to deal with people not coming to vote again in the next 5 years. And then the next question that I saw from the higher institution one is, I mean, for me, when we led on campus in UNISA, you deal with your campus politics in a specific way because you know what is happening on your specific campus or in your specific institution of higher learning. But it's very important for student leaders to understand how they're going to deal with the issues on campus, because we can deal with the University of Pretoria in one way, but we can't deal with it in the same way in UNISA or in TUT. So we can't have a blanket approach on how we're going to deal with an issue of a VC hating politics. We could go to protest, we could do petitions, there's so many things that you can do, but I think it boils down to student leaders understanding how their specific institution of higher learning functions and how they would deal with it in that light.
Tshepo, you can jump in.
Yeah, I want to address this one of the tribe quickly. And I want to read. A tribe is a social grouping consisting of families, communities linked by social, economic, religious, or blood ties with common culture, right? So if there's nothing that says a tribe must be African or must be native, there's nothing, guys. People think a white wedding is like something modern and a Zulu wedding is cultural. No. A white wedding is somebody else's culture, by the way. So when I call them tribes, I use the word deliberate so that they're on the same footing, right? Afrikaners and vendors, they are not on different footings where the other one is more advanced. No. They're all tribes and they're behaving very similar, right? So I want to just clarify that no, they're tribes. You can't refer to white people, especially ours, as a tribe, because they behave similarly. They go hunting, they like rugby. They have a certain way of doing things, right? And they have their norms. They do. They have their norms. How they get married is a certain system of somebody must buy a ring. There's bridesmaids and things like that. So I hope I answered the issue about tribes. And I answered it because the issue of identity in South Africa, we try, I won't go around it, but it's an issue because ours is a colonization of a special type, right? You must live with the people who colonized you. And I think we also, slightly underestimated the effects of those things. So I usually make a joke that comrades took their children to schools. Immediately after liberation, they all took their kids to these lovely schools. But the lovely schools actually taught their kids a very anti-revolutionary, anti-progressive thinking, right? And that's why we might have a big problem. So it's a very dicey issue. But let me come back to the point you made earlier about people opting out of democracy. I listen to other political parties. I like the ANC, but I listen to the DA, I listen to the EFF, I listen to the UTM. And I was listening to a conference of the DA, right? And Tony Leon, I can't find it on YouTube anymore, but I wanted to find it. Tony Leon said, guys, we don't need black votes that much. All we have to do is to convince the majority of this country to opt out of this thing, and that will increase our margin of the votes. So the idea of people opting out of Democrats is also not natural. That's what I'm trying to get. It's not something that's happening by itself as a phenomenon. No. There's somebody driving it for their own interests, right? So it's not as natural, as harmful, as apolitical as we think it is. There's a narrative out there that you see nothing has happened. What it advocates for somebody else's political motives, right? So, and that's why I'm saying even those people with those political motives must come to the table and tell us that no, guys, we're doing this because we also have no other way of surviving. If all these black people gang up against us, what are we going to do? We actually have to defend ourselves by doing propaganda, by telling people not to participate in democracy because we run a risk of losing whatever we accumulated in apartheid times. We are going to defend ourselves and our gains. So the point is, things are not as neutral and as organic as we think they are. Right? And that's why I'm saying those guys must come to the table. The guys from whoever owns Media 24, and it's not a coincidence. You can all see how stories are run. We can also there's a narrative behind it. They too must come to the table and say, guys, we thought we had to do this because if we didn't, our survival was at risk. Right? So I'm saying they must come to the table. What I don't agree with is that what's happening in South Africa is an issue of a natural phenomenon of how things ought to go. It's not true. We are seeing political interest. People who drive the idea of neutrality and objectivity are driving a political narrative. It's only neutral when it's against certain interests and it's no longer neutral tomorrow. It's strange, right? So those guys must come to the table. They must come to the table. Let's talk frankly. Let's hear them. Maybe they're making a good argument. Let's hear them. They must make the argument to say, guys, we are in trouble. We were scared. We thought we were defending ourselves, but we've got into a mess. Right? Let the people who voted for the MK also come to the table and say, guys, this is why we did it. We thought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everybody, in my opinion, must come to the table. And for one, I am proud of young people. I think young people have shown us now that they are engaging. They're trying their best, right? They're trying their best in a very tough time. And I saw them in the queues. I think everybody saw it, right? But if you look at it in quantums, in large numbers, right? Me and you here, right, are not the norm of young people, right? We're not the norm. So me and you see each other a lot. And even our social media algorithms, we're going to see people like us who are living lives like us. And we might be misled to think that young people are these people who are engaging, who are active. But the stats show us, the numbers show us that it's not true. Yes, our smaller groups that interact with each other are doing slightly better. Yes, our smaller groups that do what, right? But overall, young people are not saving money. Young people are not employed. Young people, in the actual sense, in the numbers, right? But I think there's a big improvement. But we must not be deluded by our own bubble or social setting. It's not true. It's really not true. It's really not true. I think I'll pause there before.
Thanks a lot. Very interesting inputs. I'm joined today by Comrade Tshepo, Lethea, and Comrade Boitumelo Thage. Apologize for the last comment we shared. Can we kindly be respectful? That was a very derogatory comment. It's just that it was written in Zulu, so it took me time to actually, internalize it, because we try to share your comments so that it's an engaging space, right? It's an engaging space. So please just be mindful of the language you use, because at the end of the day, we may disagree, we may not agree, but we have to be respectful so that we can learn from each other. Doesn't mean that when Tshepo says something that I fundamentally disagree with, there's nothing for me to learn in what he's saying. There's actually a lot to learn from people that you don't agree with, and you could hear it even in the comment he made about what Tony Leon said, right? Ordinary comrades would not listen to what the DA is saying, but by having the tolerance of the ear, you are able to pick up to say that even this whole thing of the voter apathy, it's engineered. because there are some people that benefit from it. And it's true. I mean, even in that example I used, where on campus you'll be told that you're only representing 18% of the student populace. It benefits management to ensure that, the student populace is not engaged in SRC elections, right? Because they understand very well that once they are engaged, that sort of dictatorial leadership becomes diluted. So these things are engineered, So thanks for bringing that up, Tshepo, because it then says we really need to think hard about what these electoral outcomes tell us. Because I feel like we often, take very simplistic conclusions about what these numbers are telling us. And that's why we're always off the mark most of the time in terms of what's happening, right? I mean, even this whole notion, people want us to work together. Yes, there's some element of truth to it, but it's not sufficient, right? It's not a full scope of what that outcome is telling you. And I feel that all the political parties have not done a great job in analyzing what these huge numbers that did not vote mean, right? And hence I said I hope that that discussion will also form part of this national dialogue, so that we can understand what are these numbers telling us, what is this disinterest telling us, and what is likely to happen if we don't respond to it. So guys, we're going to go a little bit further, about 15 minutes, because there's some questions coming in. There's one from Leroy. Let's say, are we still loyal and principled in our actions with regards to the National Democratic Revolution? And what is our fundamental effect of realizing the National Democratic Society with regards to our political landscape? Are we still really in charge of the revolution, or this thought is met with skepticism? So basically, the question is around the National Democratic Revolution, to say, is there still a commitment towards the National Democratic Revolution? And maybe the question I want to extend to you as comrades is that, while on a national level there has been an appreciation that this is a moment of fundamental consequence for the nation, and it requires a national dialogue, right? Isn't it also a moment of fundamental consequence for the ANC itself, right? And if we were to replicate that idea of a national dialogue from national politics, how would it look like inside the ANC? And maybe that conversation, my view is that must be had even before going to the national dialogue, so that the ANC can have a particular position that its members are rallying behind going into that national dialogue. Yeah, any of you can jump in. I know when it comes to party matters, we tend to be reserved, because some of these discussions can be career limiting for some,
Yeah, some of us, we've always spoken our minds. We don't have ambitions of career politics. Look, let me put it this way, right? I try to avoid things that point at other people, because it's easy. It's easy for me to say, Jacob Zuma must do this, Cyril Ramaphosa. It's easy. I think it's a cop-out. So my plea now to everyone listening, I think please go have a national dialogue with your own family. Go do it. And you'll realize how hard it is to get your own family members to come to a meeting, to agree on doing something, to acknowledge your own mistake. It's very hard to do it, even at your level. Now, after you do that, then you can appreciate how hard it is for the ANC to do it, for the region to do it. Because when we don't apply ourselves, everything looks easy and we can just lament and complain, right? It's easy to say, yeah, as Zuma could not even make it. Yeah, do it. Try it. And where you have influence, try it. Because, by the way, these ideas of national dialogues and things like this, they can, as you're right, they can permeate to the lowest structure of social organization. And I'm saying, go do it with your friends. Ask your friends now, guys, let's meet. How much money are we saving? Yeah, your friends don't even talk about how much money they're earning, let alone saving. We struggle with things we must talk about that are important, right? So I'm saying, not for me, I'm arguing for the idea that we must learn this thing of talking, and we must practice it even at our own level before we even point at other people. Because once you do something, you're going to get an appreciation of how complex it is. And once you understand how complex things are, I think you can get a better buy-in. So now my solution for voter apathy and things like that, we must get people working. And given if you have been in the SRC, you actually have a better appreciation of a municipality. That there are workers, there's police, more. Now I just worried about the res. And I'm not saying it's small, but you actually get a sense of how hard, how complex things are, right? So I think young people must participate at the level at which they can participate. We must try these things where we are. Try it in your family. If you don't have you can't say, there's no branch of the ANC, it's fine. Do it with your friends. Do it at your running group. Do it with wherever you are. And obviously, I have a philosophical view now that we're living in a society, and I'm copying from Taombek. We're living in a society where individual accumulation of wealth is the dominant value system. So even white people in their corner are trying to do the same thing. Even people who are corrupt are trying to do the same thing. Even those ones who are working very hard in those offices in something are trying to do the same thing. We have convinced ourselves that we can buy ourselves out of the problems of society only if we work hard and we give it our all. I can buy my kids out of the suffering, right? And unfortunately, that's not true. We're going to learn the hard way. It's not true. You can't buy your way out of the problems of society, because the kids that you're buying for must live with other kids, right? They must live in this society. COVID does not care if you have what. I'm saying, I think we must first agree that this idea that has been sold, that if I personally, by myself, as Tshepo, as Kifense, as Boitumelo, if I do well, I'm safe from all the ills of society, right? I think I'm against that idea. And I'm saying we must try that thinking even at where we can. And once we try things where we can, I think we can now move on as responsible citizens to the next layer. I'm not saying we must not hold people accountable. I'm not saying as an excuse that, try first before you hold us accountable. No. We can do it simultaneously. But if we don't do things where we are going to be forever a pointing generation. And I don't want to be someone who points all the time. I must do something. And I'm saying, I've challenged myself to convince engineers. I'm also challenging you, Kifense, to convince your neighbor. I'm challenging you, maybe Boitumelo, to convince other parents beyond comrades. Because I think this thing of comrades, we've limited society to people who are in the ANC. And there's a lot of people who don't even know who's the deputy president of the ANC. They don't even care. They don't even know who was, I don't know, Slovo. They don't know. They don't care. And I'm saying this thing of us ANC people living in this branch thing only, it doesn't help. We must actually act out our convictions outside our traditional mode of doing things. So I hope it's a challenge to you now. As you live here, go ask your family in the WhatsApp group or whatever. Guys, let's sit and decide when this grandmother gets old. When this child, we're going to grade 8 now. You know very well after 6 years, they are going to be in first year. What's our plan as a collective so that they can get access to school? But we don't. We sit there and try go on holidays by ourselves, try do things for ourselves, and don't think of the collective interest of your family, of your neighbor. And then we're going to say Zuma, Cyril, only. So they are also wrong, but we also have a duty ourselves to do things the right way.
No, thanks, Tshepo. Thanks for that. When you speak about the difficulty of things, how hard it is just to transition from campus politics to community politics. That just from a PYA structures, from SARSCO to an actual ANC branch in the community. You think you have this fire, I know. I'm ready. Hey, you get them just you realize that these things are quite different. So you struck a chord there. You just reminded me of my experience moving out of campus, and I'm excited. I want to join an ANC branch. Yeah, Jack. I got the shock of my life. I got a real moment of reckoning to say those are two different spaces. Boitumelo, please try to respond to some of those questions. One has to do with the National Democratic Revolution, and the other one says, what needs to be done within the ANC in order to make sense of this moment?
I think the ANC has a very well put together way of addressing the things that they do within the organization. And one of those things is the policy conference that they have almost every year. I think, but to internalize it or to maybe escalate it, you would want to have an ANC that reaches the branch level, which is something that they already do. But when I say reach the branch level, I mean in local government elections, when we ran for to be a councillor, we had a community meeting, then you had a BGM, and then you had an interview process. So I think the ANC needs to do the same thing with regards to their policies, bringing communities to understand, for example, what is the NDR, what is GNU, what is the National Dialogue, what is our stance on Palestine. So the same community meetings that you had in 2021 and in 2016 for local government elections, you'd have them again now, but not to rally people to come and vote for the ANC, but to bring the community to understand what this policy is, what this policy is. For example, the most recent thing that we had to pass was the NHI, and there was a lot of commotion around the NHI and having to bringing people to understand what is the NHI. A lot of people didn't understand. They thought you'd walk into a doctor's office and say, I'm sick or I want this or whatever. So bringing society to understand beyond the BGM, because what Tshepo is saying is we've been preaching to each other. I mean, I can call you, Kifense, and we can speak for over 2 hours about the NHI, agree, disagree, take each other into confidence, then finally understand where this is. But we don't do it with our communities. And I think what Tshepo's been trying to say to us is, or what the ANC can do is bring it beyond the BGM. So have your BGM, tell us about GNU, tell us about the decision that is being made, and then beyond that, go towards a community meeting, even if it's 10 people that arrive in that community meeting. I'm not saying must fill up a stadium in Soshanguve or in Moses Mabhida. I'm saying 10 people that come will go and tell another 10 people that, okay, this is the stance of the ANC on NHI, this is the stance of the ANC on GNU, and then the message would spread. And also, I think, in my view, when you leave campus politics to go into community politics, my opinion or my experience has been that you have a different experience than somebody who just enters community politics. Yes, there's a baptism of fire that you undergo because it's tough and it's difficult, but I think you're better prepared because you've dealt with issues on campus, you've dealt with students that you are fighting for, but they are fighting you. And then, it's a back and forth. When you come into community politics, there's issues of electricity, there's issues of my father this, there's issues of, hey, ngwana ka o drownile, and all of these things, but you have a better appreciation on how to handle people, number one. So I think the involvement in student politics is important because you have a better understanding on how to deal with people. Some that don't want you to help them, but they need your help. But more importantly, how to deal with the people that you are leading with. Because in institutions of higher learning, all of us come from different places, come from different backgrounds, come from different cultures, tribes, and religions. But we all are able to find each other under one common umbrella to say we're fighting for students. So when you arrive in in community politics, from my experience is that you deal with it the same way, because there you deal with older people, younger people, women, men, um, different types of cultures and religions and races, people more experienced than you. And then in that light, it becomes important for you to then understand what your role as an individual is in that broader collective, so that when the work gets done, you understand your strengths, you understand your weaknesses, and more importantly, you understand how I want to address societal issues. And I think that's where the community aspect comes in from student politics.
No, I certainly agree. The point I was driving across is Tshepo's point that sometimes walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile, just a little mile in my shoes before you condemn me, Roosevelt says the man in the arena, who's getting mad and who's sweating, The armchair critique has it simple, today the SG of the ANC in the press briefing saying, I've exited WhatsApps because you realize you are listening to people who are lying down on their backs and they're just typing. And whether you are trying to resolve issues here, So guys, thank you so much for joining us. But before I close and give you closing remarks, I just want to respond to this question around the National Democratic Revolution, largely because I have written about it and it has been a concern for me. But I think out of the conversations I've had, I was reminded that, look, the National Democratic Revolution is not a static thing, right? It evolves. And maybe part of our challenge is that we are not, taking full account of this evolution, right? To say at this point in time, what becomes the most important thing in as far as the revolution is concerned. And it's a complex thing. It's a complex thing because the National Democratic Revolution speaks about the transformation of society in totality. But this transformation is not happening within a vacuum, right? There are various contestations. I mean, South Africa as an idea alone, it's contested. And that's why you still have a national identity crisis, because there is a contestation of what it means to be South African, right? And the National Democratic Revolution itself, it's happening within that contestation. And Marxism teaches us that, progression happens in the mediation of conflict, right? I think the most important question to ask ourselves at this point in time is to say, where are we in terms of the revolution? And how do we reposition the way we think about the revolution? Because the revolution is not something that is happening at our control. There are many uncontrolled variables that are moving at the same time, that we need to take full account of, that I feel that we don't take full account of, because in our minds, the National Democratic Revolution is this static thing, is this Bible that has to be followed step by step. And that's why we have strategy and tactics. And responding to the question I posed, I feel in the same way that on a national level, we say this is a moment of fundamental consequence, and in part it requires a national dialogue. There needs to be some sort of a consultative or policy conference within the ANC to actually determine, what does this moment tell us? What does it say about us as the ANC, as an organization? And are we really geared up to grapple with this new reality? What are the new things that need to happen? How do we run with our structures? How do they engage with the community? How do we engage these people that have not voted? Do we have sufficient mechanisms to engage them? So I feel we need that kind of dialogue even within the ANC that will be drawn from our collective wisdom in order to produce a new framework of how the ANC must politic, how the ANC must engage society, how it must engage its opposition parties, how it must be an effective opposition itself. Because the reality is that in some cases we might be opposition, right? And there is no framework currently that says for an ANC to be an effective opposition, this is what it must do. So those are some of the things that I feel must come out of this moment, where we really start rethinking about the movement and start giving true meaning to this notion of the renewal, right? We need to renew. We are forced by circumstances to move at a faster pace in terms of renewal. So that would be my perspective, my own personal view on those two questions. Let me give you your final closing comments on this question around the national dialogue, in really expressing our gratitude for you guys taking the time to be with us here. I feel we've discussed very important issues that are going to inform discussions even beyond this platform. So let me give you some time to give us your closing remarks, at least about 3 minutes each, and then we'll close it off. Any of you can start.
Okay. Oh, I think part of what I would want to close off with is to cement the importance of us bringing young people / the entire broader society to the table with regards to this discussion. More importantly, I would want to then put it to all of us that form part of this discussion and those that might see it later, that maybe let's also be part of those young people that are going to agitate the proposal that was, or the example that was made by Tshepo, that speaks to say, we want Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, John Steenhuisen, the Ruperts, the Oppenheimers, and all of these key figures to be part of a conversation that's going to be held. Even if it's not necessarily something that's going to impact GNU right now or the national dialogue right now, but something that's going to hold weight in the next 10, 20, 30 years, where we would probably be in our 30s by then. So that conversation needs to happen, and we must be the ones that drive it, be part of the conversation, but also drive it so that in the next national dialogue that takes place, it will be likely that Tshepo is going to be the Thabo Mbeki of that time. Kifense will be the Oppenheimer of that time. And we need to know, how does such a dialogue take place? How do we engage with issues that we're faced with? I mean, in 30 years, I don't think we'll be faced with an issue of electricity. We might be faced with an issue of how does a car fly, or whatever it is that would be happening in that time period. But the national dialogue would be something that sets a tone for the next generation, which would be us. And I'm saying the next generation of Thabo Mbeki is not the next generation of leaders, because there's also a cementation that we must have that says, well, not the next generation of leaders, what happens now, right? Well, the current, and we're preparing the next generation of leaders. So when we say in the future, this is what we want to happen, it's going to be that thing of a young defense is going to be sitting saying, no, we must call Tshepo to come and help us to this engineering crisis. How do we address it, and all of these things. So in closing, I would want us to deal with issues, agitate, and I think all of us have been able to agitate when we were still on campuses. We are former president of the Feds SRC and all of these things. So we know how to agitate. We can bring all these key figures down, maybe even through this platform. Bring Thabo Mbeki, Oppenheimer, Rupert, all of these people, come have a conversation. We can even add a young person in that dialogue, but it's something that's going to hold weight in the future, and that's why it's going to be very important that we do that. So yeah, thanks.
Tshepo.
So my last part is that I think we need experts, people who know, who have seen the stats, to bring them to a point where we can understand. We need the big power players, not to drive the narrative necessarily. I think I take them as a resource. We must hear what they're saying, right, and take from there and chant the way forward. So it's actually our national dialogue. They are going to be presenters who must speak and show and say the things that we want to hear. We can ask them questions. The way forward is going to be deliberated by us, but we need their input as experts. We need their clout and their audience as big power players. We need to know what actually went wrong, what happened, right? So we want them to make the input, but it must be us who chant the way forward. So, but I want to end with some words from one of my favorite fellows called Plato. He says, okay, I'm paraphrasing essentially, right? But for Plato, justice aims to achieve the good of the whole, whether it is of the soul or of the state. However, revenge, being a personal response of wrongdoing, often seeks personal satisfaction rather than common good. So sometimes there are things that we do because we want to feel good about them. And lamenting is one of them. There are many things that we can do to feel good and feel justified. And words is not one of them. And we know why people resist words, because words don't actually feel as good. You want people who are not feeling your pain to feel something, and you feel like you need action, you need what. However, we must think about it properly. Are those things that we're doing to justify how we want to feel about the situation, or are those actions for the common good for us and future generations? And I'll end there. Thanks.
No, thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, man, let's continue this dialogue. As Tshepo said, let's not end here. Let us go in dialogue with our families, our friends, whatever, because essentially we need to talk more. But thank you so much, guys, for having us and for coming here and being part of this conversation. There you have it. That was a conversation around the national dialogue, a youth perspective of the looming national dialogue. We are just waiting on the announcement of when that will happen. But I think the key message out of this conversation was that we must endorse this initiative. And in fact, as part of endorsing it, we also need to go back in our own small circles and start having dialogues. And I think that may be taken lightly, but if you think about it, some of the challenges that we're facing, it is our own brothers and sisters and even ourselves who are contributing to them. We might need to have those discussions to say, but Kifenze, Mchana, you're corrupt, and you gloat about being corrupt, you need to stop, because at the end of the day, it is always the building block of society that will always have an impact on the totality of society. It is the family unit. It starts at the family unit and then it grows from there. So if you find that some of these challenges can be traced back to the family unit and we're not doing anything about that, then we are not serious about effecting any meaningful change. So let us go out there, dialogue, as we are doing here on Tintswalo's perspective, having conversations with young people every week just to inspire that spirit of dialoguing and try to find common solutions to the problems that we have. So thank you so much for joining us, and to those that have contributed to the conversations through your comments and questions, we really appreciate it. Let's meet again next week on the same platform. Just follow us on all our social media platforms to find out what we'll be talking about. Meanwhile, have yourselves a good night and keep warm.